Hello, my name is Catherine Fowler, and I am joined today by my colleague Deanne Unruh. We're the co-directors of the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, NTACT, and today we look forward to sharing what NTACT has been able to accomplish in partnership with states over the last 5.5 years. This PowerPoint and a handout with links to resources from the NTACT are posted with this video presentation. NTACT was funded to assist state education and vocational rehabilitation agencies, local education agencies, and vocational rehabilitation offices and service providers to implement evidence-based and promising practices, ensuring that students with disabilities, including those with significant disabilities, graduate prepared for success in post-secondary education and employment. Our work is focused on providing these state agencies and their partners with effective tools and resources to examine and then develop their capacity to improve and support efforts locally that prepare students with disabilities for success beyond high school. Because NTACT has two equally primary audiences, state vocational rehabilitation or VR agencies and state education agencies, our center has been uniquely positioned to focus much of its efforts on collaborative working relationships in states. These are the 5 objectives that NTACT was originally funded to address: increased use of data-driven decision-making, improved quality of secondary transition services, increased knowledge and implementation of strategies to reduce dropout and increase graduation for students with disabilities, increased participation in rigorous academic preparation, and increased participation in career-related curricula. Our work is focused on the work in 60 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. Clearly, these are broad and large outcomes with many components and many ways to measure them. Over the next several minutes together, Deanne and I will share some of the activities that we have conducted as NTACT to address these areas, as well as the outcomes achieved in the states with which we have partnered. NTACT is one of the technical assistance centers funded by the Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA, that is also funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, within the U.S. Department of Education. NTACT's work over the last 5.5 years has supported states as they implement the transition requirements identified in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and those identified in the more recently reauthorized Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, as well as the components of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and the Carl D. Perkins Act for Career and Technical Education that relate to services for students with disabilities. Because NTACT's work focuses on serving state leadership in both education and vocational rehabilitation and multiple objectives as outlined by the Department of Education, the topics of its technical assistance are varied, though all are focused on improving state capacity to improve local practice for positive adult outcomes for students with disabilities. NTACT's leadership, knowledge development, technical assistance specialists, and evaluation staff hail from these various institutions: the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, the University of Oregon, Transcend, Western Michigan University, the University of Central Florida, the University of Kansas, and Portland State University. The group has brought together varied expertise in secondary special education, vocational rehabilitation, and systems improvement topics over the last 5.5 years. NTACT's knowledge development activities are centered on identifying effective practices and developing products and tools to assist states and local providers, as well as the students and families they serve. Each product listed here is also included in a handout which accompanies this presentation. The handout includes a brief description and a link to the resource. These are a sampling of the resources NTACT has developed. I'll highlight a few, and the handout should be referenced for a more complete set of resources. Since NTACT was charged with identifying evidence-based and promising practices in the field of secondary transition, there is a resource that has compiled a list of those practices to teach skills that align with the pre-employment transition services. This list hyperlinks to practice descriptions, which describe the intervention and the population with which it was found to be effective. NTACT's predictor implementation self-assessment may be used by interagency teams in communities or schools to self-assess their own practices associated with preparing students for employment beyond high school. There are also professional development resources such as the work-based learning module developed with the Transition Coalition, and toolkits on such topics as competitive integrated employment, interagency agreements, and post-secondary education and training preparation. Most recently, NTACT and the Workforce Innovation National Technical Assistance Center, or WINTACT, developed the Guide for Collaboration, which is intended to assist vocational rehabilitation agencies and service providers in their collaborative work to serve students in schools. Now I'll turn it over to Deanne.
We're now going to talk about the technical assistance model that NTACT provides. NTACT provides technical assistance at 3 distinct levels: universal, targeted, and intensive. We will provide explicit examples of each in the next few slides. All states and stakeholders may access universal supports at any time. State agencies may request targeted technical assistance through a request form to NTACT staff. And finally, state vocational rehabilitation and education agencies jointly applied for intensive technical assistance in cooperative agreement years 2015 and 2016. 11 states were selected to engage in the process that included a deep infrastructure analysis and data-driven needs assessment, which then provided the development of a theory of action to improve outcomes for students with disabilities in a specific area, and ongoing technical assistance using the tenets of implementation science to select and implement a practice for statewide implementation across a 3 to 5 year time period. At the universal level, in addition to the products available through NTACT's website, NTACT has hosted monthly webinars or Ask the Expert events, webinars with 2 weeks of online facilitated discussion between the presenter and audience since the summer of 2015. They have focused on such topics as developing integrated work experiences for students with disabilities, providing services for students with the most complex support needs, or understanding labor laws for student and youth work experiences. NTACT hosted several webinars in partnership with state agencies to share processes for interagency collaboration between education and vocational rehabilitation agencies on such strategies as resource mapping or data sharing and use. WINTACT and the Vocational Rehabilitation Youth Technical Assistance Center, or YTACT, have regularly been partners in the development of the webinars and Ask the Experts with NTACT. Additionally, NTACT has hosted 6 capacity building institutes since 2015, including one virtually in the summer of 2020 during the pandemic. The Capacity Building Institute, or as we call it, the CBI, is an opportunity for an interdisciplinary state team to gather for a mix of content sessions interspersed with structured and neutrally facilitated team planning sessions. It was a 2.5-day event hosted each May until this year, when plans needed to change due to the travel restrictions and safety concerns. Approximately 40 states' teams have participated in the Capacity Building Institute each year. With NTACT's focus on building interagency partnerships, we have observed not only an increase in the number of participants who represent vocational rehabilitation, but an increase in the number of state teams with multiple representatives from state and local VR, rounding out more collaborative teams. At NTACT's 2018 and 2019 Capacity Building Institutes, each state team reported on their progress across years. Given the emphasis on the implementation of pre-employment transition services, the majority of states had identified goals to achieve related to interagency collaboration, sharing data, and developing and delivering services across agencies. In addition to the support of state teams through the Capacity Building Institute process, NTACT has partnered with federal agency representatives, technical assistance centers, including WINTACT and the YTACT, organizations and state agencies to deliver content during the Capacity Building Institute.
NTACT has regularly been invited in by states working with WINTACT or YTACT to facilitate the involvement and engagement of state education agencies and other partners to support the work of the VR agency. This technical assistance has taken the form of supporting states as they develop interagency agreements at the state and then local levels. It has also been reflected in strategic planning to determine a rollout for customized employment efforts. Most often, state and local practitioners have engaged in collaborative, meaning VR and education, professional development regarding roles and responsibilities, common data elements, required transition components under both IDEA and WIOA, and effective practices such as universal design for learning in the classroom and employment settings, or specific interagency collaboration models such as circles or the youth transition program. Also, serving students with complex support needs has been a topic of this collaborative technical assistance. Sustainable success appears much more likely in states and local communities that take these steps forward collaboratively rather than as a single agency. Partnering with other TA centers to bring a combined expertise and perspective has been powerful in the states where this has occurred. NTACT has also hosted communities of practice to meet states' needs. The rural community of practice met regularly for a couple of years and shared identified strategies for work-based learning experiences in critically rural areas that led to state representatives from that community presenting at 3 national conferences. More recently, the Special Education, Career and Technical Education, Vocational Rehabilitation Peer Network has met quarterly. They've engaged in a 5-part webinar series and participated in a summit, resulting in signed agreements, data sharing, and increased enrollment of students with disabilities in CTE courses and completing CTE, Career Technical Education programs, preparing them for improved employment outcomes.
We will now move into our 3rd level of technical assistance, which is intensive technical assistance. Following an application process in 2015 and 2016, NTACT entered into intensive technical assistance agreements with 11 state education and vocational rehabilitation agencies. The intensive TA process was initiated with an infrastructure analysis process, including a data-driven needs assessment and resulting development of long-term goals and the mid- and short-term objectives and tasks, or as we like to call them, outputs of a technical assistance plan. NTACT has partnered with the state vocational rehabilitation and education agencies on services to secondary students and youth with disabilities in Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, the Bureau of Indian Education, Delaware, Maryland, Nevada, North Dakota, Oregon, West Virginia, and the Education Agency in the Republic of Marshall Islands. We'll share more about the outcomes in this intensive technical assistance process in a moment. One specific way that NTACT provided intensive technical assistance to local schools and communities was through a model of local technical assistance in a 12-week cohort study process. In its final year, we have our first cohort of vocational rehabilitation teams participating and completing a self-study to develop more effective partnerships with schools for the delivery of pre-employment transition services. This was done even during the pandemic. The content for the self-study was developed in partnership with WinTAC's pre-employment transition services staff.
To address the 5 objectives for the NTACT, our technical assistance to state VR agencies, state education agencies, and their other state-level partners and local stakeholders focused on an array of topics depending on the needs. All of NTACT's products and technical assistance are grounded in the research on evidence-based or promising practices that promote skills of secondary students with disabilities. Universal, targeted, and intensive technical assistance have provided practitioners with an increased knowledge of the evidence-based and promising practices to teach or promote academic skills, such as specific instructional strategies and use of universal design for learning, or employment skills, including the use of specific strategies to teach employment skills, as well as broader concepts such as engaging educators and families in customized employment initiatives. Life or independent living skills, including effective strategies to teach self-determination or self-advocacy skills, financial management skills, transportation, other daily living skills that are critical to post-school success. NTACT provided professional development through products and workshops on the process of engaging students in their own educational and service planning development through student-led curricula and concepts. This included a focus on the collection and use of transition assessment data, a requirement under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in partnership with other stakeholders like vocational rehabilitation to drive a meaningful transition planning process. Another tremendous area of focus for NTACT's technical assistance in states included instruction and research-based strategies to deliver transition services collaboratively across agencies, as well as broader concepts of articulating roles and responsibilities, developing memorandums of understanding, sharing data, and developing joint professional development plans to enhance interagency collaboration, as mentioned previously. Similarly, providing instruction and strategies for family engagement and transition planning and service delivery was one of the many topics addressed through NTACT's work in states. Some states also reached out to NTACT for its support in identifying and implementing school completion and dropout prevention strategies as well.
And our last technical assistance topic that we will talk about is program structures. Finally, across the topics already named as a center focused on building the capacity of states to develop and sustain improved practices, program structures, including attention to the use of data tools and database decision-making processes, quality professional development delivery, often including coaching strategies, planned systems for technical assistance to local providers, and analysis and change of policies as noted were crucial, especially in the states that NTACT worked with intensively across time, as well as those that participated in its capacity building institutes across multiple years. These program structure efforts, grounded in implementation science tenets, were viewed as critical to developing and sustaining effective practices that improved outcomes for students with disabilities. We are now going to provide some data relative to our 5 project outcomes, and the first one is the increased use of data-driven decision-making. Each of the 11 states that have received intensive technical assistance from NTACT have worked with the Center for more than 4 years, moving through a process of cross-agency, cross-system infrastructure analysis, and plan development to implementation. Each state is now even more savvy with their use of and focus on the use of data to drive the selection of evidence-based practices for local implementation. All intensive technical assistance states increase their capacity to use data for program improvement, including collection and use of data, specifically evaluation data. Additionally, some states focus on the use of shared data and the ability to share data as they refine memorandums of agreement across agencies at the state and local level as part of their work with NTACT. So 3 of the 11 intensive states developed the data sharing agreements. The Capacity Building Institute model described earlier includes a facilitated team planning model that encourages and actually requires that state teams to examine its data from special education on student performance and outcomes and from vocational rehabilitation regarding services and outcomes for transition age students and youth, as well as other data sources. Across all Capacity Building Institutes, 53 states have engaged in a process to improve their use of data to drive their work to improve transition outcomes. Our second project goal is to increase the implementation of quality transition services. There are numerous measures of the quality of a state's transition services. Indicator B13, a reporting requirement for the Office of Special Education Programs, is a measure of transition program compliance in special education. And 75% of the states receiving intensive technical assistance services from NTACT increased or generally maintained compliance as measured by that indicator. Other measures important to vocational rehabilitation programs may be reflected in the students' post-school outcomes. As measured by the Office of Special Education Programs, Part B, Indicator 14 in special education, these outcomes improved for 10 of the 11 states receiving intensive technical assistance for NTACT. Interagency collaboration is a key component for quality transition service implementation. All intensive states receiving technical assistance reported improved collaboration through a survey measure, citing a deeper understanding of roles and responsibilities. All intensive states that are intensive technical assistance plans with NTACT develop shared goals and commitments across agencies to improve quality transition services, the results of which are reflected in the outcomes reported in the next several slides. These states, like many, focus on the collaboration through the targeted technical assistance from NTACT, implemented joint professional development and a clear flow of services across education, vocational rehabilitation, and other agencies serving students and youth with disabilities. By examining the participation of NTACT Capacity Building Institute attendees across time, In the past 2 years, vocational rehabilitation participation on teams increased from 65% of teams, including meaningful VR representation, to 91% of teams, including vocational rehabilitation as partners. Our third project outcome is to reduce dropout and increase graduation rates. All states want to see improved graduation rates and school completion rates for students with disabilities. Data tell us that students who graduate achieve better employment and other outcomes beyond high school. In 4 states receiving intensive technical assistance from NTACT, graduation was a focus of their work with our center. In the 3 states that included a state vocational rehabilitation program, the VR program was deeply engaged in efforts to examine these data, define reasons for early school departure, and develop interventions to address the problem, including targeted work-based learning experiences and partnerships with special education and career and technical education. Each of the states observed tremendous increases in their graduation rates. For example, across the 4 states, one state increased their rate from 43 to 59%, another state from 11 to 25%, and a third state from 62 to 76%. One state demonstrated an actual reduction from 70% to 66%. This state saw this reduction in most recent year of data collection, attributed this to the fact that more students were actually remaining in school due to the state's efforts at retention of students. However, these students are requiring more than 4 years to complete the graduation requirements. The state knew this, but due to their attention to the data and using the data to drive their program decisions, it was a good decision for them to make. Our 4th project goal is to increase the participation in rigorous academic preparation. The most prominent connection in NTACT's work in states to address academic preparation beyond the identification and professional development to improve students' academic skills in core subjects is in the area of enrollment and success in career and technical education. As mentioned earlier, NTACT has hosted a series of professional development and state sharing events in partnership with Rehab Services Administration, the Office of Special Education Programs, and the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. 2 of the 11 states receiving intensive technical assistance honed in on career and technical education enrollment as a focus of their work with NTACT. 1 state reported increases in the enrollment of students with disabilities in CTE courses across 2 years, and more importantly, a more significant increase for students with disabilities meeting the CTE benchmarks to progress to the higher levels of CTE coursework. The 2nd state reported data from the districts who had served as pilots for the now scaling up efforts across the state. In both cases, enrollment increased, and due to collaborative funding of paraprofessional positions, course failure rates are decreasing. Our 5th and final goal of the project was to increase participation in career-related curricula and career development. The data reported on this slide are demonstrated across 5 states. In the 1st state, it demonstrates that the pre-employment transition services delivery increased from 0 to 550 students with disabilities, and their summer work employment program increased from 0 to 474 across 2 years. In a 2nd state, the participation in work-based learning experiences increased for students with disabilities from 44% to 56%. And specifically in a local pilot in this state, 9 students became employed, 3 participated in project search, 2 in a work training program, and 1 in a technical assistance school. In the 3rd state, the pre-employment transition services delivered increased from a little above 1,400 to around 2,000 across 2 years. In a 4th state, their summer work program increased from 166 students with disabilities participating to more than 300 of 2 years. And the 5th state focused in on paid work opportunities for students. And this rate for students with participating in paid work rose from 0 to 259 students. These data reflect the national momentum for serving students with disabilities, providing greater access to work-based learning experiences and other pre-employment transition services. These goals were set as a part of each state, and then locals work for NTACT as part of their intensive technical assistance plans. Most importantly, in each state, these are efforts that were not implemented by vocational rehabilitation alone, but with their education partners. The 5 objectives of NTACT's work are addressed at a variety of technical assistance levels through a variety of mechanisms in the states which have received intensive technical assistance across a few years. The initial infrastructure analysis drove the state's area of focus and selected interventions. While each state used a data-driven decision-making process, their goals and interventions to achieve these varied. Collaboration across agencies to achieve those goals, as we described earlier, was one of the most common factors across the very different states, and NTACT played a critical role in facilitating that collaboration to achieve improved outcomes for our students with disabilities.
Just as NTACT's efforts in states empower collaboration, we have also collaborated with others to provide the expertise and support needed in states. We rely on the guidance and support of not only the Rehabilitation Services Administration and the Office of Special Education Programs, but also have engaged with the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education in recent work. As we continue to help states expand their work to their developmental disabilities and mental health agencies, university partners, and others, we continue to reach out and access federal guidance and resources to inform that work and those efforts. As mentioned earlier, related to targeted technical assistance specifically, our partnerships with the WNTAC and YTAC have been invaluable. We have collaborated to serve specific states, and those results have included increased expectations for integrated employment, signed interagency agreements at the state and local levels, in some cases inclusive of other entities beyond vocational rehabilitation and education partners, such as developmental disabilities or behavioral health or juvenile justice. Also, increased knowledge by practitioners of strategies for serving students with complex support needs, increased knowledge of roles and responsibilities across agencies, increased collaboration in the delivery of pre-employment transition services, states with a clearly planned continuum of work-based learning experiences, and inclusion of education as a partner in the planning of customized employment efforts in states. We also partner with the National Resources for Advocacy, Independence, Self-Determination, and Employment, RSA's Parent Center, on webinars and presentations. The RAISE Center, as it's noted, has hosted its annual meetings in combination with NTACT's Capacity Building Institute during 3 of the last 6 years in an effort to increase family engagement on the state teams in attendance and also improve the content accessibility related to transition for members of the RAISE group. We have also benefited from the expertise of centers like the Job Driven, the Program Evaluation and Quality Assurance Center, and the National Clearinghouse for Rehabilitation Training Materials, or NCRTM. Of course, our position as a jointly funded center affords us collaboration and making connections across OSEP-funded technical assistance centers as well, with a connection to quality data and transition-age students and youth. National organizations such as CSAVR and its Transition Committee have provided NTACT with invaluable insight into the relevance of our work and what's needed in the field. In the most recent months, NTACT, like many, has needed to pivot some of our attention to what agencies are doing to serve students and youth with closed schools and distanced services. Now, through a link at the top of each page at www.transitionta.org, there is a section of resources and guidance specific to transition related to serving students at a distance. There's guidance on services during restricted access to schools and community services. There are program types of resources related to transition assessment and planning, related to transition-focused instructional resources, employment preparation-focused instructional resources, and then resources specifically focused on students with complex support needs. Additionally, there are resources for practitioners and those providing professional development that relate to online instruction. And then finally, we have been able to collect examples from states that might be useful to our vocational rehabilitation partners. We've also hosted a series of 4 webinars since the end of March and into April. The captioned recordings of each and the related resources are available under Events at www.transitionta.org as well. NTACT is pleased with the work that states have accomplished over the last several years. Having the support of both the Rehabilitation Services Administration and the Office of Special Education Programs has afforded our staff and stakeholders opportunities to collaborate and refine collaboration to new levels. It has been an exciting time to be providing technical assistance in the field of transition, and we're eager for what is next